Let's make a decorator. So we're going to make a function decorator. That is a decorator meant for decorating a function, not meant for decorating a class. So the decorator function that we're going to make is a function decorator. And it can be used like this. This syntax at logme is a way to define a function that is decorated by this decorator. This syntax here is equivalent to defining the function first, undecorated on its own, and then taking the variable that points to it, which is the function name, and pointing it instead to the return value of calling our decorator with the original function object, which looks weird. A decorator is a function that accepts a function and returns a function, which we're storing in that greet variable. So this here is equivalent to that decorator syntax. We're accepting a function and then replacing it with whatever function came back to us. So given that, and given that we have the code to our decorator up here, what is your guess that's going to happen when we call our greet function with tray? So I'll give you a moment if you'd like to pause and take a guess at what might happen. When I hit enter here, we're going to see what actually happens. So when we call greet with tray, what happens is calling with tray and an empty dictionary is printed out, and then hello tray is printed out, and then returning none is printed out. And the reason is when greet was called, the greet function didn't get called. Remember, it was replaced. It was replaced by the return value from our decorator, which happens to be another function that we defined inside of our decorator function. This function here that we defined in our decorator, it's called a wrapper. And when it was called, it accepted any arguments we gave to it, anything at all. It printed out those arguments. And it printed them out as a tuple in a dictionary because that's what Python passed them in as. And then it called our original function with whatever arguments were given to our wrapper function. And then it printed out the return value of calling our original function. Now, our original function doesn't actually return anything, which means it returns the default value of none. So it printed out returning none, and then it returned none. So this wrapper function, the reason I named it wrapper, which is a common variable name for this inner function in a decorator, I named it wrapper because it is meant to wrap around the function we're decorating. What I mean by that is it does something besides just calling the function, but it should call the function that we're actually decorating. So its job, its primary purpose is to call the function we're decorating and also do something else, because it's supposed to replace this function, but not entirely replace it. It's supposed to augment it, and it augments it by delegating to that function by calling it, which is the reason it accepts any arguments we might pass to it, because it doesn't know what arguments our original function is supposed to accept. So you can think of this wrapper function as kind of like a sandwich. Typically, this inner function in decorator does something first, and then it calls our original function, and then it does something else. So you've got at the top of the sandwich and the middle of the sandwich, that's where we actually call our function, and then the bottom of the sandwich. And it may be an open-faced sandwich. Maybe you do something first but not after, you do something after but not first, but you're going to do something besides just call the decorated function. So we've used our decorator on one function, but we could use it on as many functions as we like. So here we're using this logme decorator on a get hypotenuse function that accepts two arguments, and it actually has a return value. What do you think will happen when we call this function with 3 and 4? What's your guess? Now note we're capturing the return value here. So when I hit enter, what's your guess that we're going to see? So we see calling with, and then the positional arguments and the keyword arguments. There were only positional arguments. And then we see returning 5.0, which means the return value should be 5.0, and it was. So a decorator is a function that accepts a function and returns a function. At least a function decorator is. Class decorators work a little bit different. Typically, the function that that decorator returns wraps around our original function, meaning it often looks like a sandwich. It does something first, then it calls our original function, and then it does something afterward. So that's how to make a decorator in Python.